Money and power can hide a man's sins, but they can't force him to love you. Carmela learned this while hiding in the shadows of Le Bernardin, listening to her husband call her a fat, pathetic shield. That was the entire world. The sweet Mafia wife finally died. Carmela Costello was not what anyone pictured when they heard the phrase Mafia wife. In a glamorous New York underworld populated by razor-thin former models draped in Tom Ford, Carmela stood out. She was a size 22. She had soft, generous curves, a round face that flushed easily, and a lifelong battle with a thyroid condition that made losing weight an impossible nightmare. While the other wives gossiped over champagne salads at Bergdorf Goodman, Carmela baked. She found comfort in the quiet rhythm of kneading dough, hiding her deep insecurities behind the walls of her sprawling Tribeca penthouse. 3 years ago, she had married Silas Romano. Silas was the kind of man who commanded a room the second he walked in. 6'2", sharply handsome, always tailored in custom Bryony suits and utterly ruthless. He was the underboss of the Romano crime family, ambitious and cold. Carmela had been foolish enough to think he loved her. She had mistaken his initial calculated tenderness for genuine affection. The brutal reality was far less romantic. Carmela was the only daughter of Vincent the Bull Costello, the aging don who controlled the lucrative East Coast shipping ports. Silas didn't want Carmela's heart. He wanted her father's docks. Marrying Carmela was the ultimate strategic move. It solidified a permanent alliance between the Romanos and the Costellos, putting Silas in direct line for total control. Once the wedding ring was on her finger, Silas' warmth vanished, replaced by a chilling indifference. He bought her apology gifts-heavy Cartier love bracelets, endless bouquets of white roses, but he rarely touched her. Their marriage was a ghost town. Carmela tried everything. She hired elite nutritionists, subjected herself to grueling sessions with trainers at Equinox, and wept silently in her custom marble bathroom when the scale refused to budge. Then came Chloe. Chloe Sinclair was everything Carmela was not, a size 0 runway model with sharp cheekbones, a cascading mane of blonde hair, and a cruel, knowing smile. The whispers in the Mafia underground started almost immediately. Silas was seen with Chloe at private VIP tables at Carbone, buying her diamonds on Fifth Avenue, treating her like the real wife while Carmela was kept locked away like an embarrassing family secret. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday in late October. Silas was hosting a high-stakes dinner in a private dining room at Le Bernardin, schmoozing city officials and his capos. Carmela had spent hours getting ready, forcing herself into a custom black velvet gown that she hoped made her look a little less heavy. Throughout the dinner, Silas barely looked at her. He played the perfect host, pouring expensive wine, but his body language toward his wife was a wall of ice. Midway through the evening, Carmela excused herself to the restroom. She felt utterly suffocated by the glares of the other mob wives, whose eyes screamed pity and disdain. Taking a moment to compose herself in the lavish, dimly lit hallway, she splashed cold water on her wrists. As she walked back toward the private room, she paused. The heavy mahogany door was cracked open just an inch. Silas had stepped into the antechamber to smoke a cigar with his trusted right-hand man, Tommy, and another guest who had slipped in through the kitchen. Carmela's breath caught in her throat. It was Chloe. The model was sitting brazenly on the edge of a mahogany credenza, her long legs tangled with Silas. "I don't know how you do it, Dom," Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with venom, "having to wake up next to that whale. Why do you even bring her out? She's embarrassing." A walking tent in Chanel. Carmela froze, her hand hovering over the brass doorknob. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs, praying for her husband to defend her, to say something, anything that proved he cared. Instead, Silas chuckled. The sound was like a physical blow to Carmela's stomach. He took a slow drag of his cigar and took a sip of his Macallan 25. "Relax, Chloe." Silas's voice was smooth, devoid of any guilt. "You know exactly why she's here. She's just a shield. As long as I'm married to Vincent's fat daughter, the Costello ports are mine. The feds look at us and see a devoted husband taking care of a pathetic woman. The father stays happy. The money keeps laundering through the docks and no one asks questions. She's a useful, oblivious distraction. That's it." Tommy laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You gotta admit, boss, the commitment is impressive." "Taking one for the family. I do what I have to do for the Romanos," Silas replied coldly, pulling Chloe in by the waist. "Now, stop whining. You know you're the only one I actually want." Outside the door, Carmela didn't cry. The tears that usually came so easily to her simply didn't exist. Instead, a strange, terrifying numbness washed over her. The sweet, naive girl who baked pies and prayed for her husband's love died right there on the plush carpet of the restaurant hallway. In her place, Vincent Costello's daughter finally woke up. She turned around and quietly walked out the back exit of the restaurant, stepping into the freezing Manhattan rain. Carmela didn't confront Silas that night. When he finally came home at 3 a.m., smelling faintly of Chloe's Tom Ford perfume, Carmela was lying in bed, her back turned, pretending to be asleep. She knew that confronting him would only result in him gaslighting her, tightening his grip, and possibly putting her in physical danger. She was dealing with a monster who viewed her as property, a mere lease agreement for a shipping empire. For the next 3 weeks, Carmela played the role of the oblivious, heavy wife perfectly. She smiled softly at Sunday dinners. She accepted his distant pecks on the cheek, but behind her soft exterior, her mind was moving with the tactical precision of a 5-star general. Then, tragedy struck. Her father, Vincent, suffered a massive heart attack while playing cards at his social club in Brooklyn. He died before the paramedics could even load him into the ambulance. The funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral was a media circus. FBI agents snapped photos from blacked-out SUVs across the street, while the 5 families gathered to pay their respects. Silas played the grieving son-in-law flawlessly. He wore a sharp black suit, kept a protective arm around Carmela's shoulders, and accepted the hushed condolences of the underworld. "Don't worry, Pen," Silas whispered in her ear as they watched her father's casket being lowered into the ground. "I'll take care of everything. The business is safe with me." Carmela looked at him, her face obscured by a thick black veil. "I know you will try," she thought, "because you think you've already won." What Silas didn't know, what no one knew, was that Vincent the Bull Costello was not a fool. He had always known the nature of the men in his world. He knew Silas was a shark. Before he died, Vincent had set up a fail-safe. The shipping ports were indeed the physical asset, but the money, the millions in untraceable cash, the real estate deeds, the blackmail ledgers on every corrupt politician in New York, and the routing numbers for the family's Swiss accounts at Julius Baer were not willed to the Romano family. They were entrusted solely to a biometric vault in Zurich, and the only person whose fingerprints, retinal scan, and voice authorization could unlock it was Carmela. The night after the funeral, Silas informed Carmela he had to go to settle some disputes in New Jersey. Carmela knew he was actually taking Chloe to his private estate in the Hamptons to celebrate his new uncontested power. It was the window she had been waiting for. The moment Silas's Maybach pulled out of the Tribeca garage, Carmela went to work. She didn't pack her designer clothes. She didn't take the heavy Cartier jewelry Silas had bought her. She found them disgusting now, like chains of a prisoner. She only packed her father's encrypted hard drives, her passports, and a small, unassuming black notebook her father had given her on her 21st birthday. She called a secure, encrypted number, A man answered on the second ring. It was Gideon, an ex-Mossad private security contractor who had owed her father a blood debt. "It's time," Carmela said softly. "Extraction team is 3 minutes out, Messrs. Costello, wheels up at Teterboro in 40, Gideon replied. Before she walked out the door of the penthouse for the last time, Carmela went into Silas's massive mahogany-paneled home office. She took off her 3-carat diamond wedding ring and placed it perfectly in the center of his leather blotter. Next to it, she placed a single sheet of heavy cardstock. She didn't write a long emotional letter. She simply wrote, "I am no longer your shield." Check the Julius Baer accounts. By the time Silas returned from the Hamptons 2 days later, he was riding high. He was the new king of the docks. He walked into his penthouse, annoyed that the lights were off and no smell of baking was wafting from the kitchen. "Carmela," he shouted, throwing his keys onto the counter. "Where are you?" "I'm starving." Silence. He marched into his office intending to pour a drink and froze. He saw the ring. He saw the note. A cold spike of adrenaline hit his chest. He snatched up the paper, reading the single line. Check the Julius Baer accounts. His hands shaking, Silas frantically dialed his lead offshore accountant in Geneva. "Get into the Costello master accounts, now." He roared into the phone. He heard the furious kicking of a keyboard on the other end, then a long, terrifying pause. "Boss?" The accountant's voice trembled. "They're gone. The main accounts, the shell companies, the blind trusts for the warehouse deeds. Everything. What do you mean, gone?" Silas screamed, his face turning purple, the veins in his neck bulging. "Where did the money go?" "It's been legally transferred out, sir. Authorized by the primary biometric holder. There's zero balance." "Boss, she took everything. You own the physical docks, but without the operational funds to pay the unions, the workers will strike by tomorrow morning. You have nothing." Silas dropped the phone. The device clattered against the hardwood floor. He stared at the empty wedding ring sitting on his desk. The fat, pathetic, oblivious woman he had mocked had just completely dismantled his empire in a matter of hours. And she was gone. The crisp, thin air of the Swiss Alps was a world away from the humid, blood-soaked concrete of New York. Carmela sat on the sprawling terrace of a heavily fortified estate overlooking Lake Zurich, wrapped in a thick cashmere shawl. She was still the same woman, soft, heavy, with curves that the cruel world of the Mafia had deemed unworthy. But the way she carried herself had fundamentally shifted. She no longer slouched to make herself invisible. She no longer wore oversized, shapeless designer gowns meant to hide her existence. She wore custom-tailored silk that draped perfectly over her size 22 frame, her chin held high, her eyes sharp and calculating. She had not run away to hide. She had relocated to conquer. Back in New York, the Romano family empire was imploding with spectacular violence. Without the operational funds from the Julius Baer accounts, Silas was entirely paralyzed. The physical ownership of the Costello ports meant nothing if he couldn't pay the men who actually moved the cargo. Within 48 hours of Carmela's disappearance, the International Longshoremen's Association initiated a brutal, unyielding strike. Miles of shipping containers sat rotting on the docks. Smuggled weapons, illicit narcotics, and millions in untaxed merchandise were locked down tight, heavily guarded by Union men who had loved Vincent the Bull Costello and despised the arrogant son-in-law who had taken his place. Silas' descent into panic was swift and humiliating. He paced the floors of his Tribeca penthouse like a trapped predator. His right-hand man, Tommy, was fielding hundreds of furious phone calls from the other 5 families. The commission, the ruling body of the East Coast Mafia, was bleeding money because of the bottleneck at the ports. And in their world, losing money was a sin punishable by death. Where the hell is she? Silas roared, shattering a baccarat crystal tumbler against the marble fireplace. She's a fat, pathetic baker. She doesn't know